speaker box loud, hitting that stuff till you hearing that sound.
Okay guys, for the last 30 years plus, Nissan has been trying to make the ultimate driver's car. Those are my words, not Nissan's. And the way they've gone about it is very interesting. They have everything. They've built everything from, on one end of it, the GTR, okay, track focused, it's become very heavy nowadays. They've of course built the Silvia, just a more organic, lightweight, really small, simple, rear wheel drive manual sports car. And then of course the Z cars, which have kind of become a thing of their own. They've gone through so many models and they don't have one specific thing. There's no one thing that you can point to that makes a Z car. They're not all inline sixes, they're not all NA, they're not all two-seaters. They're very, very different. So with the new Z, upon first impressions, what I think they've done is just kind of mashed up all of the best elements from the previous generation Z cars into one car. But of course, looks can be deceiving. So let's find out if that's the case and what Z car this most reminds me of. Let's go. First things first, Nissan makes it incredibly easy to turn off traction control. This is not a complicated German car where it is tough to do that. It is incredibly easy, just one button on the left side of the steering wheel. Let's do that. We are going to be doing a little bit of a hill climb today. Let's start off with the exterior. I don't know about you guys, I think Nissan absolutely killed the modern retro design with the Z. In an age where a lot of cars have overcomplicated lines, too many lines. Instead of putting all these creases and vents and edges where they don't necessarily need to be, they went the simple route. And when I look at the Z, it makes me want to just kind of step back and look at the car as a whole, the design as a whole, rather than focus on all these little details, which I love. I think they've done a fantastic job of throwing it back to the old cars, but as well, of course, the rear end throws it back to the Z32, which I will get to later. Fully sideways there. Largely based on the 370Z here. There are a few different changes. The front suspension has been reworked. There's a bit more caster there. The dampers are different. They're a monotube instead of a twin tube. They can react a little bit quicker. Nissan says it still retains much of the comfort, and there's not much sacrifice there between this and the 370Z. Largely, I would agree, although this is it's a stiff car. So what are we talking here? 400 horsepower, 350 pound-feet of torque out of a 3-liter VR30 engine here. Of course, I drove the Q60 400 Red Sport, which also has this engine. That, of course, is a luxury car. It weighs a few hundred pounds more than this. I mean, I thought the Q60 was quick. The torque is monstrous. There is torque everywhere, and they've done a little bit of witchcraft, some trickery in rerouting boost back into the intake to keep the turbos spooled as often as possible. There's virtually no turbo lag. Like, I can feel the boost, but it's not as pronounced as it is, let's say, in the B58 that's in the Supra. Starting price for the Z here in Canada, $51,000. That does not get you the performance pack. This one I'm driving today has everything fully optioned with the performance pack. So $62,000 Canadian, or about $53,000 USD. It's a lot of money. It undercuts the Supra a little bit. It just, Nissan, where is the theater? When does it talk to me? The biggest thing that's missing with the powertrain are the sounds. There's no pops and bangs, there's no loud or quiet exhaust mode. There is actually no sport mode either, which I kind of like. It's simple. This is an authentic Japanese driving experience built in Japan. Even these wheels that come with the performance pack, raised wheels here, but it's missing any kind of, like, I'm not asking for a crackle tune. That's not what I want to do. You guys can do that all you want to your heart's content in the aftermarket. What I want is maybe the occasional crack when I'm shifting gears, something. And to mitigate this a little bit, Nissan is pumping in exhaust noise into the cabin, which makes the car actually sound better when the windows are up. When the windows are down, it is so incredibly quiet. It's kind of disappointing. It's not kind of disappointing. It is absolutely disappointing. See, when I drove the Q60, I complained about the droney, low RPM resonance while cruising. On the upside, they've solved that here perfectly. The Z doesn't drone, but as a byproduct of that, it seems they've muted the exhaust overall to a point it's almost better just to live in blissful ignorance with the windows up. I do have a solution though, and it's called an inline six. Okay, so as you guys can see, if you have keen eyes in the intro, right here in front of me, we've brought out, thanks to Jonathan, and we'll see him in a second here, 260Z. This is, of course, the body shape, the iconic Z shape that Nissan kind of drew inspiration from here. But of course, like I mentioned in the intro, Nissan dropped the inline six very early on in the Z cars, and then of course, Z32 and onwards basically have all been V6s, which leaves a little bit to be desired in the sound department. Of course, it carried on in the Skylines and other things, but for the Z cars, as far as the Z cars go, it's kind of the Achilles heel. So let's get in the 260 and see if any of this original driver feel or DNA has made its way into the new Z. Oh yeah, that's a Skyline shifter feel. Sick. You guys want to hear it? RB20 under the hood. It's largely stock. For the RB20, he has swapped in an RB25 turbo, so it's a little bit upgraded in that sense, just like a modest upgrade. So Jonathan warned me the transmission, he's gone through a couple of RB20 trans, which I've heard are, quote, like glass. I have heard that multiple times. So his car is an example of one where he has had to replace the RB20 trans multiple times, which is not surprising. Double clutch in a second. Yeah, that's a lot smoother. God, it shifts amazing. The rear end is whining, the trans is whining. Good power. Brakes require some muscle. Oh. There's one thing right there. You guys feel that downshift? Immediately, I was able to jump into this car and nail the first downshift. The pedal feel and the brake feel and the clutch feel work together immediately so well. It's just so easy to jump in and drive. I had to kind of get used to the new car. Now, of course, steering and stuff, the clutch is a little bit easier on the new car, but they both have feel. They both have great clutch feel, the new car included. But this is just, it's familiar. You know, if you've driven an older Skyline or an older Z car, almost 8,000 RPM there from the RB20. Oh, it's got good torque.
Hey guys, this is my 74 260Z. Got an RB20 driveline and engine with R200 long nose diff and CAS 1.5-way LSD. A couple little upgrades here and there. Got some nice Recaros and some brake upgrades up front from a old Toyota Hilux that fit just perfect. It's really exciting. You know, like I think the one thing that this car really does well is corners. I'm not really winning any drag races with this car, but it sure can corner well. So when we repainted it, I thought the best color for it would be GTR color, so I chose Bayside Blue. I've got a Grant steering wheel because these came with a little bit of a steamboat style big steering wheel in them, and that one just feels a little better to the hand. Well, shortly we're gonna be swapping out the RB20 for an RB25 Series 2, so a little bit more power and a little bit more torque. And I'm probably gonna go with a little bit of a bigger brake kit as well because it's nice to stop. This is my first one, and I've had this one for about 10 years.
Without driving it, of course, what are your thoughts on it just overall?
I think the car is really cool. I think it has a lot of styling points that, you know, reflect back to the older models of Z. I love the rear taillight setup on these. I think it looks sharp, and you know, it's really cool. Like, I'd love the chance to drive one day.
Thank you.
No problem.
Fighting the steering wheel a little bit. Oh, rear end feels planted. Putting the power down so nicely. Sorry about the things rattling around here. I'm sure Jonathan has a few spare car parts. It's really cool though, stepping into the car, the ergonomics and how I'm sitting over like a 40-year period have really not changed much, if at all. The seating position feels almost identical. The triple gauge pod up here, that's very synonymous with the Z cars. Also, our 34 Skyline GTT has the same thing. 370Z, of course, they all have it. The hood on this car is much longer than, of course, the V6 because it's double the length. The inline sixes, yes, do the math. This is a beautiful car. When I think of a classic Japanese sports car, two cars come to mind: the 2000 GT and the Datsun Z. And in some ways, the new car is actually more compromised than this. Rear visibility in this car is amazing. Of course, that's because lack of safety features, lack of structural rigidity. This was a very simple car back in the day. Yeah, I mean, is it sad the new Z doesn't have an inline six? Absolutely. They're missing out on so many visceral moments that just are not even possible in the new car. That's the biggest thing the new Z is lacking. Oh, I'm in love. I'm in love. A little pop there too. There is an S mode button, so there isn't a sport mode, but of course if I hit S mode, there we go. Downshifts for you, perfect downshift every time. That's nice to have in traffic, not really necessary. Let's turn that off. 6-speed's good here. Now, this is a dual mass flywheel. They have added a damper in there to kind of absorb some of the vibrations, so it shifts a bit smoother, apparently, than the 370Z. I have not driven a 370Z in some years, so that's why I say apparently. It feels great. I've never once missed a shift. The biggest difference between this and the 370 is how the car feels. In the 370Z, even in the Nismo, there's not much torque down low. So what ends up happening is, yeah, it's NA, you want to rev it out, you want to hit the red line, even though it's not the greatest. It's not going to rev to 8,500 RPM, right? Whereas here, this, I find myself short shifting, especially around town a little bit more, and you can still get like 90% of the acceleration out of the car by doing that. There's not much sacrifice. So to have fun and just kind of downshift, upshift, downshift over and over and over again, you can spool the turbos and shift at 5,000 RPM and get a lot of the acceleration which makes me drive the cars completely different. This feels more like a bit of, dare I say, muscle car. Much like the Z32 did. This feels a lot closer to the Z32 twin turbo in the way it delivers torque. It's punchy. The rear end gets squirrely. It loves to kind of kick sideways way more often than the 370 ever will under slower speed, normal driving conditions. It feels a lot closer to a Z32, and I love that. Gauge cluster is great here. Of course, modern times, they went to a fully digital gauge cluster. I would have really loved if the Z had stuck with an analog tach and then maybe done some digital readouts on the side. That's just me. That's just subjective experience, of course. We do have a lot of information here. We've got engine oil temp, water temp, diff temperature in the rear, and of course, oil pressure and boost. See, even there, second gear, warm, dry day, and it is searching for traction. Just a little bit of a gradual wag of the tail in a straight line. Feels incredibly stable though. A little bit longer wheelbase than the Supra 2, so it lends itself a little bit more to the touring experience, except with a lot of the tech, and I will get to that right now. It's familiar. It's eerily familiar. Lots of 370Z carryover here. The door handles are the exact same. There's still this kind of awkward to adjust vent, and we have great materials. There's leather and Alcantara here if you go with the performance model. Tons of color options, and there is a mixture of analog and digital, although it's mostly analog. And we see that with the seats. There's a strange mixture of automatic adjustments for forward and back and recline, and then you have manual lumbar and manual adjustments for the height of the bottom of the seat. Passenger, it's all manual, and you don't get lumbar. Now, all these manual adjustments end up working in the Z's favor when I look at the steering wheel. Have any of you guys been in a Golf R or a GTI or a, I don't know, Ferrari Roma? Haptic feedback buttons, they're awful. No one likes to use them most of the time. They're annoying. Here, it looks as if, I thought actually initially, they were gonna be all haptic. It's a piano black finish. It looks like they're touch buttons. They're not, they just tried to make it blend in with all of the screens. Speaking of screens here, you get a slightly larger screen with the performance model, but unfortunately, this is kind of where the Z doesn't hit its Grand Tourer target, especially when compared to the Supra. The infotainment's lacking. It's a little bit behind. It works, and it's just kind of lacking a few features. Does not have a 360 cam. We don't have a heads-up display, and the backup camera is a little bit low res, and the UI just doesn't look great. It lags sometimes, and it's a little bit inconsistent, but you know, a part of me is like, okay, Nissan's just trying to direct me back to the road. Like, no, pay attention to the road, pay attention to the way the car drives, the way it makes you feel. Forget about all that stuff. You don't need music when you're driving this car. Oh wait, no, you kind of do. You kind of do. It's got a few different components that increase rigidity. The car as a whole is much more rigid than the 370. The car itself feels smaller and more nimble than the 370, and I think that does come down to the fact that everything's just a little tighter here. Now, the biggest change, in my opinion, well, there's two, of course, the engine, but second would be the steering. They've gone to electric power steering here. It's not steer-by-wire, so there's a difference here. There is still a physical connection between my hands and the road. Well, thanks, Nissan. Yeah, that's like a basic thing that I would want in my sports car. Thank you. Is there still feel? Yeah. Is it as connected to some of the older Z cars? I actually really enjoyed the 370Z Nismo. No, but is the steering weight good? Yes, it's very direct. Performance pack gets you a bunch of things. I mean, before I even get into it, you're not going to want to buy the base model of this car. You want the performance pack. I honestly don't think it's worth the buy if you don't get the performance pack. That is just my opinion, but it comes with bigger brakes. Factory, it just comes with 2 piston up front, 1 in the rear. It gets doubled for the performance pack, 4 up front, 2 in the rear. We also get a 1.5-way mechanical limited slip differential in the rear, which helps, of course, with your oversteer and corner exit and just putting the power down in general. The base model gets a square stance, As far as wheels and tires go, 245s all around, whereas here, 255s up front for a little bit more bite, and 275s in the rear. Yeah, that's about all I can say about the new Z. It's a sharp car, and while not perfect, it's simply a reminder that manual sports cars are slowly fading. And I've been saying this for years, but let's just try to enjoy them as much as we can while they're still here.